The Dusty Discovery. The rhythmic thwack of the broom against the rough-hewn floorboards was the shed's sole accompaniment, a comforting counterpoint to a crow's distant caw. Sarah hummed a quiet, tuneless melody, her breath misting faintly in the cool morning air that infiltrated the grimy window. Dust motes danced in the sparse sunlight, a silent ballet she often observed. While her sisters found shed cleaning a tiresome duty of forgotten tools and cobwebbed corners, Sarah viewed it as a sanctuary. Its quiet solitude allowed her thoughts to unfurl, unburdened by the farmhouse's usual din. Today, the shed presented a particular challenge. Father had decided it was time to clear out the farthest corner, a jumble of rusted implements and splintered wood untouched by light for years. Pulling on her work gloves, their rough canvas a familiar embrace, Sarah began. She started with a broken plowshare, its metal cold and heavy, carrying it to the scrap pile outside. Next came a stack of old feed sacks, brittle with age and smelling faintly of mildew. Each unearthed item whispered a silent chronicle of the farm's past. As she delved deeper, the air thickened with the scent of aged timber and neglected things. Behind a precarious stack of horse collars, she noticed a narrow crevice where a loose board had shifted. Curiosity, a quiet but persistent companion, tugged at her. Reaching in, her fingers brushed against something hard yet yielding. She pulled, and a small, leather-bound book slid out, dislodging a cascade of dried leaves and spiderwebs. It was neither a Bible nor a hymnal, nor any volume she recognized from their meager home collection. The leather was dark, almost black, with a worn sheen suggesting years of handling. No title graced its spine, only the smooth, cool texture of aged hide. A faint, earthy aroma clung to it, a blend of old paper and something else, vaguely metallic. She brushed away the dust and webs, her humming forgotten. Sarah settled onto an overturned bucket, cradling the book in her lap. The hinges groaned softly as she opened it, revealing pages of thick, cream-colored paper. Her breath hitched. The handwriting was exquisite, a flowing script slanting elegantly across the page, each letter formed with a precision she had only seen in printed texts. It wasn't the neat, practical hand of her sisters, nor her father's sturdy, masculine script. This was distinct, beautiful, almost artistic. The faded sepia ink testified to its antiquity. At the top of the first page, a date was written, clear and precise. July 14th, 1987. Sarah performed a quick mental calculation. That was over 30 years ago, before her birth. A thrill, sharp and unexpected, coursed through her. This wasn't merely old, it was ancient, in the context of her own short life. She traced a finger over the words, though she couldn't decipher them from her distance. The language was English, of course, but the intricate loops and flourishes made it feel almost foreign. The sheer volume of writing, page after page filled with this elegant script, hinted at a mind brimming with thoughts, a life lived through words. Who had penned this, and why had it been secreted away in the shed's darkest corner? A faint whisper of wind snaked through the shed's cracks, rustling dry leaves on the floor. Sarah felt a peculiar pull, a sense of intrusion mingled with undeniable fascination. This journal felt intensely personal, a secret abandoned. Yet, here it was, in her hands, as if awaiting discovery. She knew she shouldn't pry, that it wasn't her place to delve into another's private musings. But curiosity, a live thing, squirmed in her chest, demanding attention. The English world beyond her community was a theoretical concept, a place of different rules and customs she rarely encountered directly. This journal felt like a direct conduit, a window into that unknown. She ran her thumb over the worn edge of the cover once more, the leather smooth and cool. It felt substantial, weighty with untold stories. For a moment, the hum of the outside world, the distant crow, the rustle of leaves, receded. There was only Sarah, the dusty shed, and the silent promise of a forgotten voice echoing from the past. The plowshares and feed sacks were forgotten. The shed, once a chore, had become a portal. Reluctantly, she closed the journal, the soft thud echoing in the quiet. She carefully tucked it under her apron, feeling the rectangular press against her side. It was a secret now, her secret. She would finish her work, and then, when the house was quiet and everyone asleep, she would open it again. The world beyond the farm had suddenly become much closer, much more tangible, contained within the covers of this dusty discovery. And Sarah, usually so content within her familiar boundaries, felt a stir of unfamiliar longing for something more. That evening, after the last dishes were put away and the house settled into its familiar quiet hum, Sarah retreated to her small room. The oil lamp on her bedside table cast a warm, dancing glow, pushing back the encroaching shadows. With a deep, almost reverent breath, she opened the leather-bound journal. The worn cover creaked softly, a sigh from the past. The first entry was dated April 12th, 1987. The script, so elegant and precise, filled the page. Sarah's finger traced the flowing lines as she began to read. The wind carries the scent of damp earth and new growth today. It reminds me of beginnings, though what new thing can begin for a man such as myself, I cannot say. Another year turns, another season unfolds, and I remain here, a solitary sentinel in a world that rushes past my quiet corner. Sarah's brow furrowed slightly. Solitary sentinel. The words resonated with a quiet ache she knew well, though hers was a solitude woven into the fabric of her life, not an Englishman's chosen isolation. She read on, the lamplight reflecting in her earnest eyes. Thomas, as she soon learned his name to be, wrote of his days spent observing the natural world around him. He described the precise shade of green on new oak leaves, the vibrant flutter of a monarch's wings, the mournful call of a distant owl. He noted the subtle shifts in the creek's murmur after a rain, the way the light fractured through the pines at sunset. His observations were keen, almost poetic, revealing a mind deeply attuned to the delicate intricacies of his surroundings. Today, a red-tailed hawk soared above the fields. Its shadow, a fleeting phantom, danced across the tall grass. For a moment, I imagined myself up there, unbound, seeing the world from such a height, all its petty concerns laid bare beneath me. A foolish fancy, perhaps, but one that brought a brief, fierce joy. Sarah felt a peculiar kinship with Thomas's quiet appreciation. She, too, found solace and wonder in the fields and woods surrounding her farm, in the cycle of growth and harvest. But her world was bounded by tradition, by the rhythms of community. Thomas's words hinted at a freedom, and perhaps a loneliness, she had only ever glimpsed in her imagination. He wrote of books, of music, of art, worlds entirely foreign to Sarah's experience, yet he described them with such passion that she could almost feel their allure. He spoke of philosophical ponderings, of deep thoughts about purpose and meaning, questions that often stirred within her own mind late at night, unspoken. One entry in particular caught her attention. They say solitude is a choice, but sometimes it feels more like a condition. The silence can be a comfort, a balm to a restless spirit, but it can also be a heavy blanket, muffling the heart's deepest yearnings. To share a sunrise, a thought, a quiet moment of understanding, that is a treasure I have yet to find. Sarah paused, her finger resting on the page. She knew that feeling, that unspoken longing for a connection that went beyond the everyday. Her life was rich with family and community, yet there were corners of her heart that felt untouched, unseen. Thomas's words were like an echo from a distant room, a resonance that was both comforting and unsettling. She continued reading late into the night, long past when she should have been asleep. The flame in the lamp flickered, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to whisper Thomas's words to her. She learned of his quiet battles with despair, his unwavering hope for something more, his unwavering love for the beauty he found in the world despite his isolation. As the hours slipped away, the pages turned, and the man named Thomas began to feel less like a stranger and more like a voice from a parallel existence. His dreams, his observations, his profound sense of longing, they all wove together, creating a tapestry that felt strangely familiar. The journal was no longer just an old book. It was a window into a soul, and through that window, Sarah felt a new part of herself stirring, awakened by the whispers from the past. She closed the journal just as the first hint of dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, leaving her with a lingering sense of wonder and an undeniable, curious pull toward the man whose words now resided within her heart. Shared solitude. The scent of beeswax polish clung to Sarah's hands as she moved through the kitchen, a quiet hum in the air from the refrigerator, a modern convenience her family had only recently installed. Sunlight, filtered through the starched lace curtains, painted stripes across the worn wooden floorboards. Her fingers, usually quick and efficient with domestic tasks, paused over a stubborn smudge on the countertop. Thomas's words from the journal still resonated within her, a quiet counterpoint to the rhythmic squeak of her polishing cloth. The heart, in its profoundest solitude, often yearns for a reflection, a kindred spirit to witness the quiet unfolding of its inner world, he had written. Sarah found herself tracing the imaginary outline of those words on the cool granite. It was a sentiment she knew intimately, a silent ache that often surfaced during her solitary walks through the fields, or while observing the intricate patterns of frost on a winter window pane. She had always dismissed it as a fanciful notion, a quiet indulgence she ought to suppress. Yet, here was a man, decades before her, articulating that very yearning with an honesty that both startled and soothed her. Later, as she helped her mother hang laundry on the line, the crisp autumn wind snapping the sheets like sails, Sarah's gaze drifted towards the distant tree line that marked the edge of their property and, she knew, the boundaries of Thomas's former world. His descriptions of the woods, of the subtle shifts in light and shadow, the particular scent of pine needles after a rain, mirrored her own observations. She recalled his entry about the lone hawk circling above, a symbol of freedom and isolation. Often, while tending to the garden, she too would pause, tilting her head back, watching those same majestic birds spiral against the vast blue. The world he saw, the details he cherished, were the very same ones that spoke to her own spirit. "A penny for your thoughts, Sarah," her mother Martha said, adjusting a heavy quilt on the line. Her voice was gentle, her eyes observant. Sarah blinked, pulling herself back from the quiet landscape of Thomas's journal. "Just thinking about how beautiful the fall days are," she replied, perhaps a little too quickly. She offered a small, hesitant smile. Martha nodded, her own gaze sweeping across the fields. "They are that. God's handiwork plain to see." Sarah hummed in agreement, but her thoughts were already drifting back to the leather-bound book hidden beneath her mattress. She wondered if Thomas had ever felt the weight of unspoken words, the quiet pressure to conform to expectations, while her inner world pulsed with a different rhythm. He spoke of solitude as both a sanctuary and a burden, a place where profound truths could be found, but also where the desire for connection could grow sharp and insistent. It wasn't a loneliness born of absence, but a longing for a different kind of presence, one that understood without needing explanation. That evening, with the gas lamp casting a warm glow across her small room, Sarah carefully retrieved the journal. She turned the pages, her fingers brushing over the aged paper. Thomas had written about the intricate beauty of a spider's web, glistening with dew, and the profound quiet of a snowfall. These were not grand pronouncements, but quiet, intimate observations that resonated deeply with her own often unexpressed appreciation for the small, ephemeral wonders of the world. She thought of her own habit of sketching wildflowers in a hidden notebook, or composing short, lyrical poems in her mind as she churned butter. She rarely shared these creative impulses, fearing they might be seen as frivolous or self-indulgent. But Thomas, through his words, had validated them. He had shown her that such quiet appreciation was not a weakness, but a profound way of engaging with life. Reading his entries, Sarah felt a lightness she hadn't realized she was missing. It was as if a silent companion had walked beside her, observing the same world, feeling the same subtle currents of emotion. She wasn't alone in her quiet ponderings, her thoughtful pauses, her internal world that hummed with a different energy than the practical, communal rhythms of her daily life. The sense of understanding that bloomed within her was a powerful antidote to the subtle, persistent feeling of being an outlier, of having an inner landscape that differed from those around her. Thomas's solitary musings, written in a different time and by a man she had never met, had somehow reached across the years to touch her own quiet heart. She felt seen, understood, and a profound, comforting kinship began to settle in, a shared solitude that offered a surprising sense of belonging. The more she read, the less alone she felt, the world expanding to encompass not just her own experiences, but the profound, echoing thoughts of a stranger. A chance encounter. The late morning sun, still gentle, dappled through the leaves of the ancient maple that guarded the edge of the Stoltzfus property. Sarah, her straw bonnet shading her eyes, moved with practiced ease along the berry bushes, her fingers nimbly plucking the ripe, dark fruit. The rhythmic plink of berries hitting the bottom of her tin pail was a soothing counterpoint to the chirping of crickets and the distant lowing of cattle. This patch, nestled near the winding creek that marked the boundary between their land and the long-abandoned Miller farm, was always bountiful. A sweet, earthy scent mingled with the subtle tang of berries in the air. She worked steadily, her thoughts drifting. The journal, tucked away in her trunk, was a constant, quiet hum beneath the surface of her daily tasks. Thomas's observations, his delicate turns of phrase, had woven themselves into the fabric of her own perception. Now, every glint of sunlight on a spider's web, every intricate pattern of lichen on a stone, seemed to echo his unspoken appreciation. She felt less alone in her quiet marveling at the world's small wonders. Reaching for a particularly plump cluster hidden beneath a broad leaf, Sarah paused. A flash of movement, a splash of color not entirely natural, caught her eye down by the creek. Her gaze sharpened. Tucked away under the drooping willows, a figure sat on a portable stool, hunched over something resting on his knees. An easel, perhaps? Her heart gave a curious little lurch. No one ever came to this part of the creek. The Miller place had been empty for decades. Curiosity, a rare but potent force in Sarah, drew her closer. She moved with the quiet grace of someone accustomed to the woods, her steps rustling only faintly in the dry leaves and tall grasses. As she drew nearer, the details sharpened. It was an older man, his hair a distinguished silver, his back to her. He wore a tweed jacket, its fabric softened by age, and a wide-brimmed hat that shaded his face from the sun. In his lap rested a sketchbook, and his hand, surprisingly steady, moved with swift, economical strokes across the page. He was sketching the creek, its gentle eddies and the sunlight dancing on the water's surface. Sarah hesitated, unsure whether to retreat or make her presence known. It felt intrusive to observe him like this, yet a strange pull held her rooted. There was a sense of stillness about him, a profound concentration that radiated outward, creating a small, hallowed space around him. She found herself watching his hand, the way the pencil danced, translating the ephemeral beauty of the water onto paper. Just as she decided to clear her throat, a soft snap of a twig beneath her foot betrayed her. The man's head lifted, his movements unhurried. He turned, his eyes, the color of warm earth, meeting hers across the short distance. For a long moment, neither spoke. The air thickened, charged with an unspoken understanding. Sarah felt an immediate, powerful jolt, a sense of recognition so profound it stole her breath. It wasn't just that he was an English man, a rare sight on their land, nor simply his gentle demeanor. It was something deeper, a sensation that resonated in the very core of her being, echoing the secret chambers of her heart that had been stirred by the journal. His gaze, though direct, held no alarm, only a quiet, searching curiosity that mirrored her own. His features, etched with the wisdom of years, seemed instantly, intimately familiar. A small smile, tinged with a faint melancholy, played on his lips. "Good morning," he said, his voice a low, resonant baritone, touched with an accent she couldn't quite place but found instantly agreeable. "I hope I haven't startled you." Sarah found her voice, though it felt thin and reedy in comparison. "No, sir. I was just gathering berries." She gestured vaguely towards her pail, its metallic glint a stark contrast to the verdant surroundings. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a wild drumbeat. She knew him. Not from any previous encounter in her life, but from somewhere far deeper, a place beyond memory. The man from the journal. It couldn't be. But the feeling was undeniable, an unshakable certainty. He nodded slowly, his eyes still holding hers, a flicker of something unreadable passing through their depths. A bountiful harvest, by the looks of it. He gestured to her nearly full pail. "The sun is particularly fine on the water today, don't you think?" "Yes," Sarah breathed, her gaze drawn to the creek, suddenly vibrant with a new significance. "It is." The world around them seemed to shimmer, imbued with a fresh layer of meaning. The creek, the sun, the quiet woods, all were witnesses to this impossible, yet undeniably real, encounter. She stood there, rooted to the spot, a silent question hanging in the air between them, a question she dared not voice, yet felt he somehow already understood. The man's gaze, a startling blue against the weathered canvas of his face, held Sarah captive. It wasn't accusatory or surprised, but something far more potent, a calm, knowing depth that mirrored the quiet understanding she'd found in the journal's pages. A small, tentative smile touched his lips, crinkling the corners of his eyes, and the world, which had moments before been humming with the drone of insects and the rustle of leaves, seemed to hold its breath. "Good afternoon," he said, his voice a low timbre, surprisingly warm. "Lovely day for it, isn't it?" He gestured vaguely to her basket, brimming with the glossy red of ripe berries. Sarah felt a blush creep up her neck. "Yes, it is. The canes are heavy this year." She clutched the basket handle, suddenly self-conscious of her simple dress and bonnet. He nodded, a thoughtful expression on his face. "They are. I've been watching them ripen these past weeks. A good omen for the summer, I think." He paused, then indicated his sketchbook with a slight tilt of his head. "I was just trying to capture the light on the water. It shifts so quickly." "It does," Sarah agreed, finding her voice a little steadier. She looked at the creek, the dappled sunlight playing across its surface, creating fleeting patterns that defied permanence. "It's never quite the same, even from one minute to the next." "Precisely." He looked at her then, a genuine curiosity in his eyes. "You seem to observe a great deal. Do you spend much time out here?" A wave of unexpected comfort washed over her. It was a question she might have asked herself, a shared sensibility. "Whenever I can. There's always something new to see, even in the familiar." She thought of the journal, of Thomas's meticulous observations of the very same woods. The way the light changes through the seasons, or a new bird song you hadn't noticed before. He leaned back, his posture relaxed, and a faint smile touched his lips. "Ah, a fellow enthusiast. The subtle shifts are often the most profound, wouldn't you agree? I find the early spring, when everything is just waking up, to be particularly hopeful, and then the crispness of autumn, the quiet descent into slumber." He spoke as if recounting cherished memories, his words painting vivid pictures in the air between them. Sarah found herself nodding emphatically. "Yes, the way the forest breathes in autumn, a different kind of quiet. And the first buds of spring, they always feel like a promise." She felt a lightness, an almost giddy sensation that she hadn't experienced in a long time. It was as if she were speaking to a reflection of her own soul, a companion in silent appreciation. "A promise," he echoed, his eyes crinkling again. "A beautiful way to put it." He set his sketchbook carefully on the ground beside him. "I'm Thomas, by the way." He extended a hand, his touch surprisingly gentle as their fingers met. The world tilted slightly. Thomas. The name, whispered in the quiet of her mind for so long, now spoken aloud, held a resonance that vibrated through her. Her heart, which had been fluttering like a trapped bird, gave a distinct leap, a powerful thrum against her ribs. It was him. The realization settled deep within her, a profound and undeniable certainty. "Sarah," she managed, her voice a little breathless. She withdrew her hand, her fingers tingling. "Sarah," he repeated, the sound soft, almost contemplative. He didn't seem to notice her sudden tremor. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Sarah. I don't often encounter kindred spirits in these woods." Kindred spirits. The phrase, so apt, brought a fresh wave of warmth. She wanted to tell him then, to confess how much his words had meant to her, how his quiet observations had opened up her own world. But the words caught in her throat. The moment felt too precious, too fragile to burden with such a revelation. Not yet. I feel the same," she finally murmured, looking down at her berry-stained hands. When she looked up again, his gaze was still on her, thoughtful and kind. The creek continued its murmur behind them, the only witness to this quiet, momentous meeting. The scent of damp earth and pine needles clung to Sarah's clothes, a sweet reminder of her encounter at the creek. Thomas. The name echoed in her mind, a soft bell tolling a secret. She replayed his quiet observations, the way his gaze had followed a soaring hawk, the gentle curve of his smile as he spoke of the creek's enduring song, and then his words. "Sometimes I feel like a misplaced stone in a meticulously built wall." A shiver traced its way down Sarah's spine. Those very words, or ones strikingly similar, were etched into the faded pages of his journal. "A stone out of place," she recalled, "in a world of perfect angles." The resonance was almost too precise, too profound to be mere coincidence. It wasn't just his name, it was his very essence, laid bare in the journal, now standing before her, breathing. Back in the quiet rhythm of her kitchen, the sunlight filtering through the window pane seemed to illuminate not just the dust motes dancing in the air, but also the turbulent landscape of her thoughts. The journal, tucked away in its hiding spot beneath the loose floorboard in her room, felt like a living thing, pulsing with unspoken truths. Every chipped plate she put away, every loaf of bread she kneaded, was accompanied by a silent debate. Should she tell him? The thought was a relentless hum in her ears. She imagined his face, the subtle crinkles around his eyes when he smiled, dissolving into a mask of surprise, then confusion, perhaps even betrayal. How would he react to knowing she had read his most private thoughts, his deepest fears, his tenderest hopes? It felt like holding a fragile bird in her hands, its heart beating wildly, and knowing that one wrong move could crush it. The fear wasn't just of his potential anger or discomfort. It was also of shattering the delicate, unspoken understanding that had bloomed between them at the creek. That shared moment, born of mutual appreciation for the natural world and a quiet recognition of kindred spirits, felt too precious to risk. If she revealed her secret, would that authentic connection, forged in simplicity, be overshadowed by the extraordinary nature of her knowledge? Would he see her not as Sarah, but as the girl who knew too much? Later, as she sat on the porch swing, mending a tear in a canvas bag, the rhythm of the needle pulling thread through fabric mirrored the repetitive cycle of her internal argument. The setting sun painted the sky in hues of apricot and rose, casting long shadows across the yard. The familiar sounds of the farm, a cow's low moo, the distant clatter of a buggy, the rustle of leaves in the evening breeze, usually brought her a profound sense of peace. Tonight, they were merely background noise to the clamor within. She pictured him, alone in his small cabin, perhaps writing in a new journal, or sketching the creek. She imagined the careful hand that had penned those entries, the quiet mind that had observed the world with such tender precision. His vulnerability, laid bare on those pages, was what had drawn her in, what had made her feel less alone. To reveal her knowledge would be to expose his vulnerability anew, but this time, not on paper, but directly to him. It felt like an intrusion, a violation, even if her intentions had always been pure. Her fingers paused, the needle hovering over the rough canvas. What if he felt exposed? What if he felt judged or pitied? Thomas, from the journal, was a man who yearned for connection but struggled with the fear of being seen, truly seen, for all his quiet eccentricities. And now, she had seen him. She had read his soul before ever meeting his eyes. The weight of the secret settled heavy in her chest, a stone indeed, but one she had picked up herself. It wasn't a burden she could easily set down. Not yet. The moment felt too raw, too new. She needed time to understand the depth of her own feelings and perhaps to find the right words, should she ever gather the courage to speak them. For now, the journal remained her silent confidant, and Thomas, the gentle stranger from the creek, remained beautifully, unknowingly, an open book to her. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. Stolen moments. Tucked beneath a loose floorboard, the journal now pulsed with a different energy. Once Thomas's private confessional, its pages now felt like a shared confidence, a silent accomplice in Sarah's burgeoning life. She found herself manufacturing excuses to wander to the property's fringes, her chores conveniently expanding to encompass the farthest reaches of the woods, the meandering creek banks. Clearing a fallen branch, gathering wild mint, inspecting the north pasture fences, each task became a thinly veiled pilgrimage. Thomas, it seemed, was equally drawn to these secluded nooks. Their initial, seemingly chance encounters soon blossomed into something more deliberate, a cadence of unspoken expectation. He would often be there, sketching in a small notebook or simply observing the sunlight's dappled dance through the leaves. Sarah would approach, feigning nonchalance, her heart quickening a rhythm against her ribs. Their conversations, initially bound by polite formalities, began to unfurl. The weather, the local fauna, the turning seasons, these familiar touchstones served as springboards for deeper explorations. One crisp autumn afternoon, as a breeze rustled the drying foliage, Thomas gestured to a lone monarch butterfly near a patch of late-blooming asters. "They journey so far, for so little," he mused, his voice a soft murmur against the wind. "To follow the warmth, to pursue a fleeting comfort. There's a quiet courage in that, isn't there?" Sarah, watching the delicate creature, felt a tremor of recognition. His words echoed a reflection she'd encountered in his journal, a passage on bird migrations and the human yearning for belonging. "Perhaps it's not for little," she offered, her gaze still fixed on the butterfly. "Perhaps it's for everything, for survival, for continuity, a whisper of hope for what's next." Thomas turned to her then, his eyes, the hue of rich earth, locking with hers. A silent current flowed between them, understanding, perhaps, or a mutual acknowledgement of shared introspection. He offered a slow, deliberate nod. "A hope for what's next," he repeated, as if savoring the phrase. "Yes, I believe you're right." Their talks lengthened, unhurried and expansive. They spoke of the world's quiet splendor, nature's intricate designs, the profound significance hidden in fleeting moments. Sarah found herself voicing observations she'd previously guarded, her own perceptions blooming under his gentle attentiveness. She described the shifting kaleidoscope of light through their meeting house's stained glass window, or the subtle nuances in the wood thrush's song near the creek. Thomas listened intently, his presence a warm, receptive space. He never interrupted, never judged. He simply absorbed her words, occasionally offering a quiet, perceptive comment that made her feel truly seen, genuinely heard. It was a connection unlike any she had ever known, a silent language woven beneath their spoken words. The ever-present specter of discovery seemed to recede with each encounter. They instinctively chose times and locations offering maximum solitude, a tacit agreement to safeguard their burgeoning bond. Sarah felt a thrill of rebellion, a quiet defiance both exhilarating and unnerving. She was venturing beyond the confines of her expected life, drawn by an invisible thread to this solitary, kind man. One evening, As dusk painted the sky in shades of bruised plum and rose, they settled on a moss-covered log by the creek. The air was cool and still, broken only by the gentle gurgle of water over stones. Thomas had been recounting a vivid dream, a landscape of towering ancient trees and a river of stars, speaking of its elusive beauty, the way it had lingered, a profound whisper just beyond his grasp. Sarah listened, mesmerized, a memory stirring. She had read an almost identical account in his journal months ago, a description of that same dream. The knowledge was a potent current beneath her calm demeanor, a secret she clutched close. It was a strange duality, knowing his inner world from his written words, then seeing that same world mirrored in his living presence. It felt like a privilege, a sacred trust, its weight sometimes pressing upon her. As he finished, a comfortable silence settled. Stars began to prick the darkening sky, their reflections shimmering on the creek's surface. Sarah felt an overwhelming sense of peace, a quiet joy that hummed deep within her. She stole a glance at Thomas, his profile silhouetted against the deepening twilight. He seemed lost in thought, his gaze fixed on the shimmering water. In that moment, suspended between two worlds, the one she inhabited daily and the one she was building with him, Sarah knew, with a certainty that settled into her bones, that this connection was real. Fragile, perhaps, built on stolen moments and unspoken truths, but profoundly real, and swiftly becoming the most essential part of her days. The journal, with all its secrets, felt less like a burden and more like the very bedrock upon which this new, precious world was being constructed. A shared memory. The late afternoon sun, a bruised peach filtered through the barn's high, dusty window, painted long, shifting stripes of gold across the worn wooden floor. Thomas, propped against a fortress of hay bales, absently twisted a piece of straw between his fingers, his gaze lost somewhere beyond the rafters. Sarah, meticulously sweeping loose chaff into a dustpan, felt the familiar hum of his presence, a silent current flowing between them. Their stolen moments, here in the barn or by the creek, had forged a quiet cadence, a space for observations and thoughts too fragile for the world outside. "You know," Thomas began, his voice a low counterpoint to the broom's soft rustle, "there was a time, not so long ago, when I felt like a ghost in my own life." Sarah paused, the broom's bristles still poised above the floor. She knew this feeling, had read about it in stark detail. He continued, the straw now unraveling between his fingers. "I remember one particular afternoon. It was winter, brutal cold. I'd walked down to the frozen creek just to clear my head. The world was utterly hushed, a vast expanse of white. I stood there for what felt like ages, listening to the wind keen through the skeletal branches, watching the gray sky press down like a lid. And I had this overwhelming sense of absolute solitude, like a lone, sputtering wick in a cavernous, dark room. No one would have noticed if I'd simply evaporated." He finally met her eyes, a faint echo of that old ache still lingering. It had a strange kind of peace in its own way, but mostly it was just lonely. Sarah's breath hitched. The creek, the biting cold, the vast, empty landscape, the sense of being invisible. She could almost taste the chill in the air, feel the wind's sharp kiss on her cheeks. She recalled the journal's precise phrasing, Thomas's description of the silent, unforgiving grip of solitude, and the whisper of a soul untethered. It wasn't merely a memory, it was an exact resonance, a perfect mirroring of words she had memorized. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat urging her on. She pictured him there, a stark figure against the winter canvas, and in her mind's eye she was standing beside him, an unseen companion. The journal had made her his witness, his confidant, long before their paths physically converged. The urge to speak, to confess, was a physical knot in her throat. The secret, which had once felt like a fragile shield for their nascent connection, now felt like a cruel impediment. How could she listen to him share such a raw, vulnerable memory, knowing she had already consumed it, absorbed it, processed it, without revealing the truth? It was like accepting a cherished gift, having already unwrapped it in secret. She took a shaky breath, the dustpan clattering softly as she set it down. Her hands felt strangely cold, despite the sun's warmth. This was no longer just about understanding him. It was about honesty, about the very bedrock of their shared world. Their connection, so profound and undeniable, deserved a foundation of openness. Each shared glance, each knowing smile, each quiet conversation was subtly tainted by the unspoken truth she held captive. "Thomas," she began, her voice a little unsteady, a quiet tremor running through it. The single word hung in the air, weighted with unspoken meaning. He looked at her, his expression a question, a gentle curiosity that made her heart clench. The moment had arrived, shimmering with both trepidation and immense possibility. The time for secrets was over. The truth revealed. Sarah's hand trembled as she reached into the worn canvas bag slung over her shoulder. The weight of the journal, a tangible secret, suddenly felt immense, a leaden stone in her stomach. Thomas watched her, his brow furrowed with a gentle concern, the echo of his solitary winter by the creek still hanging between them. His eyes, the color of wet slate, held a question she knew she finally had to answer. With a soft rustle, she extracted the leather-bound book. It looked small and unassuming in her grasp, yet its presence in the barn felt monumental, a sudden shift in the very air. She held it out, not quite to him, but somewhere in the space between them, her gaze fixed on a knot in the rough-hewn beam above his head. "Thomas," she began, her voice barely a whisper, a dry leaf skittering across the floor. "There's something I need to tell you, something I should have told you much sooner." He didn't speak, just waited, his posture still, his breath held. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the distant lowing of a cow and the soft whir of the barn fan. Sarah took a shaky breath, the scent of hay and old wood filling her lungs, grounding her a little. "I found this," she continued, pushing the journal a fraction closer. "A while ago, when we were clearing out the old storage shed on our property. It was tucked away, beneath some old blankets, almost hidden." She paused, searching for the right words, for a way to explain the inexplicable draw she'd felt. I started reading it." Thomas's eyes widened almost imperceptibly, flicking from the journal to her face, then back again. A faint flush crept up his neck, but he remained silent, a study in contained surprise. "I know it wasn't right," Sarah hurried on, the words tumbling out now, a dam breaking. "To read something so personal, but your words, they just spoke to me. They felt so familiar, so true." Her fingers tightened around the worn leather cover. "You wrote about the creek, about feeling like a ghost, about the silence of winter, about the way the light falls through the trees in autumn, and the way you saw beauty in things others might overlook." Her gaze finally met his, a desperate plea for understanding in her brown eyes. "I felt like I knew you, even before I met you. Your loneliness, your dreams, your longing for connection, they were echoes of my own, Thomas. It was like finding a part of myself, expressed in someone else's voice." He reached out, his hand hovering over the journal for a moment, as if unsure whether to touch it. His expression was a complex blend of shock and something else, a dawning recognition, perhaps, or a nascent understanding. He didn't snatch it away, didn't recoil. Instead, his fingers, strong and calloused, gently closed around the spine. "This is mine?" he murmured, his voice hoarse, barely audible above the quiet hum of the barn. He opened it to a random page, his eyes scanning the familiar script, his own thoughts laid bare. "Yes," Sarah confirmed, a wave of relief washing over her, weakening her knees. The truth was out, the burden finally lifted. "I know it's a terrible thing to have kept from you. I wanted to tell you so many times, but I was afraid you'd be angry, or that you'd think I was strange, afraid it would change everything between us. Thomas slowly closed the journal, his thumb tracing the embossed lines of the leather. He looked up at her, and the surprise in his eyes had softened, replaced by an emotion Sarah couldn't quite decipher. But it wasn't anger. It was something deeper, something akin to wonder. "So, when I talked about the creek," he began, his voice still quiet, "about feeling invisible, you already knew." Sarah nodded, a tear escaping the corner of her eye, tracing a warm path down her cheek. "Yes, I knew. And it made me feel even more connected to you. But it also made me feel like a fraud, like I was building something with you on a secret." She wiped her cheek with the back of her hand. "I hated that. I hated not being honest." A small, almost imperceptible smile touched Thomas's lips. He held the journal closer, cradling it in his hands. "You found my words," he said, his gaze fixed on the book, "and they spoke to you. You weren't afraid of the parts of myself I thought I had to keep hidden." He looked up, his eyes meeting hers again, and this time the gratitude was clear, shining through the lingering surprise. "Thank you, Sarah, for telling me, and for finding them." An unconventional bond. Sarah watched Thomas, the afternoon sun highlighting the flecks of amber in his eyes. The confession, a weight she'd carried for weeks, now hung in the air between them, not as a burden, but as a delicate, shimmering thread. He hadn't recoiled, hadn't judged. Instead, a quiet understanding had bloomed on his face, an almost reverent acceptance. I didn't know what to expect," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. The scent of damp earth and late-blooming asters drifted through the open barn door. Thomas offered a small, gentle smile. "Neither did I, Sarah. To have someone understand those parts of me, the ones I thought only existed in solitude. It's profound." His gaze searched hers, a silent question passing between them. "It's why I felt I knew you, even before we spoke. Your letters, your presence, the way you saw the world. It resonated with the man who wrote those words." Sarah's cheeks warmed. "And your words, they were a companion to me, through a winter that felt longer than most. They made me feel less alone, too." She thought of the countless hours spent poring over his entries, the way his observations of a snow-dusted branch or a solitary fox had mirrored the quiet reflections of her own heart. It was a secret world they had built, unknowingly, brick by brick, word by word. "It's an unusual way to meet, isn't it?" Thomas mused, leaning back against a bale of hay. His fingers absently traced the rough texture of the twine. "Most people start with pleasantries, shared interests. We started with the rawest parts of ourselves." "It's not how I imagined meeting anyone," Sarah agreed, a faint smile touching her lips. She had always envisioned a connection built slowly, through shared tasks and gentle conversations, as was the Amish way. This was different, immediate, and startlingly deep. It was like stepping into a long, familiar room, even though she'd never been there before. The silence that followed wasn't awkward, but rather a space for them to absorb the magnitude of their shared revelation. The world outside the barn continued its rhythmic hum, the distant lowing of a cow, the clatter of a passing buggy on the lane. But within their small circle, time seemed to slow, allowing the tendrils of their unusual bond to solidify. "What does this mean, then?" Sarah finally asked, voicing the unspoken question that had been swirling in her mind. She valued their connection, cherished the empathy and understanding they'd found, but the path forward, especially with the secret of the journal now revealed, felt uncharted. Thomas met her gaze directly. "It means we have something special, Sarah, something rare." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "It's a foundation built on truth, even if that truth came to light in an unconventional way. I wouldn't trade it." Sarah felt a surge of relief. His acceptance wasn't merely a polite gesture. It was genuine, a testament to the depth of his own heart. "Nor would I," she confessed, her voice gaining strength. I feel as though I've known you for years, Thomas, and yet we've only just truly begun. Exactly, he affirmed, a warmth spreading across his features. And I want to continue. This friendship, whatever shape it takes. He looked out at the fields, a contemplative expression on his face. Perhaps it's not meant to fit into any conventional mold. Perhaps that's its strength. Sarah considered his words. In her world, relationships were often defined by clear roles and expectations. This was different. It was fluid, organic, born from shared introspection and vulnerability. It felt right. I would like that very much, Thomas, she said, her conviction clear. To continue, to learn more about the man behind the journal, and for you to learn more about the woman who read it. He turned back to her, a genuine smile replacing the earlier thoughtful look. I think we have a lifetime of learning ahead of us, Sarah Stoltzfus. A comfortable quiet settled between them once more. The air, once thick with unspoken tension, now felt lighter, infused with a newfound sense of possibility. The journal, the initial catalyst for their connection, now receded slightly into the background, having fulfilled its purpose. It had opened the door, but now they were walking through it, side by side, into an uncertain yet undeniably bright future. Their bond, forged in solitude and brought to light by courage, was now a shared reality, unconventional and deeply cherished. The afternoon sun, dipping lower, cast long golden shadows across the barn floor, mirroring the long, promising path that stretched before them. They had acknowledged their unique connection, and in doing so, had chosen to nurture it, allowing it to grow into whatever extraordinary form it was destined to become.